Fame can be a tricky thing. One day you're on top of the world, and the next, you're just a name people barely remember. That's exactly what happened to Tony Franciosa, a man who once lit up Hollywood with his charm and talent in the 1950s and 60s. He was the kind of actor who could steal a scene with a single look, earning awards and starring in big movies like a face in the crowd. People thought he'd be a legend forever, a name that would never fade. But something went wrong, terribly wrong. His star didn't just dim, it crashed, leaving everyone wondering how a guy with so much going for him could fall so far. Was it his hot temper that got him in trouble with the wrong people? Or maybe the messy love life that kept making headlines for all the wrong reasons? Could it even be that he turned his back on the big screen when it mattered most? The truth behind Tony Franciosa's mysterious downfall isn't what you'd expect. It's a mix of surprising twists and bad breaks that turned a rising star into a forgotten name. Stick around, because we're about to uncover the real reasons his Hollywood dream slipped away. Tony Franciosa didn't start out as a big shot. His real name was Anthony Papaleo, and he came from a simple life in New York City, far from the glitz of Hollywood. But he had something special, a spark that caught people's eyes. In the 1950s, he burst onto the scene with movies like A Face in the Crowd in 1957, where he showed off his raw talent next to stars like Andy Griffith. Then came The Long Hot Summer in 1958 with Paul Newman, proving he could hold his own with the best. He wasn't just good, he was great, earning an Oscar nomination for Best Actor, and even snagging a Golden Globe. People couldn't stop talking about him. He had the looks, the charm, and the skills to back it up. By the late 1960s, he jumped into TV with the name of the game, playing a slick magazine editor that kept fans hooked. This was a guy who seemed unstoppable, climbing higher and higher with every role. Directors loved his energy, and audiences couldn't get enough of his style. At his peak, Tony Franciosa was living the Hollywood dream, a poor kid turned superstar with the world at his feet. So how did it all start to slip away? That's where the story takes a turn you might not see coming. Just when Tony Franciosa seemed to have it all, cracks started showing, and they weren't small ones. Behind the scenes, his temper was like a ticking time bomb. He'd argue with directors, clash with producers, and sometimes storm off sets, leaving people frustrated and unwilling to work with him. Word spread fast in Hollywood, and his reputation took a hit. Talent was one thing, but being hard to handle was another. Then there was his love life, which sounded more like a soap opera than a fairy tale. His stormy marriage to Shelley Winters, a big star herself, was all over the papers, fights, breakups, and makeups that kept the gossip flowing. It didn't help that he'd been married before, and would tie the knot a few more times later. The constant drama painted him as a guy who couldn't keep things steady. And here's where it gets really surprising. He started saying no to big movie roles. At a time when films were still king, Tony shifted to TV, thinking it was the future. Shows like The Name of the Game kept him busy, but in Hollywood's eyes, he was stepping away from the A-list game. These weren't just little missteps. They were the first big pushes toward a fall he didn't see coming. Things didn't just slow down for Tony Franciosa, they crashed hard, and it happened faster than anyone expected. His temper didn't stay behind closed doors anymore. In 1957, he got arrested for punching a photographer, and the headlines screamed trouble. That kind of press didn't just fade away, it stuck to him, making studios think twice before casting him. The legal mess and bad publicity piled up, turning him into a risk no one wanted to take. By the 1970s, Hollywood was changing, new stars were rising, and the kinds of movies he'd shined in weren't as big anymore. But Tony couldn't shift gears. He got stuck playing the same tough guy roles, and when he didn't, the parts just weren't there. Whispers started going around about personal struggles too. Some said he was drinking too much, or letting his emotions run wild, though no one knew for sure. What was clear was that the guy who'd once owned the screen was slipping away, taking smaller roles that didn't match his old glory. It was like he couldn't catch a break, or maybe he'd burned too many bridges to get one. The downfall wasn't just a stumble, it was a full-on drop that left his star fading fast. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Tony Franciosa's Hollywood spotlight had all but flickered out. He wasn't headlining big films anymore. Instead, he popped up in low-budget movies and random TV guest spots, the kind of work that barely kept his name alive. The days of awards and packed theaters were long gone, replaced by a quiet slide into obscurity. He kept acting here and there, but it was nothing like the glory of his past. When he passed away in 2006, after a stroke at age 77, the world didn't stop to mourn the way it might have decades earlier. No big tributes, no front-page stories, just a brief mention of a star who'd once burned bright. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder what happened to the Tony Franciosa who had so much promise. He had the talent to be a legend, the kind of actor people talk about for generations. But somewhere along the way, between the fights, the scandals, and the missed chances, he became a footnote instead. His legacy isn't gone, it's just buried under the mess of a career that could have been so much more. So what really brought Tony Franciosa down from the top? It wasn't just one thing, it was a perfect storm of surprises that hit him hard. His temper turned friends into enemies, shutting doors he couldn't reopen. Those wild romances and screaming headlines didn't just entertain the public, they made him look like a guy who couldn't keep his life together. And when he walked away from big movies for TV, he didn't see that Hollywood wasn't ready to forgive that choice. Add in the arrests, the changing times he couldn't keep up with, and the personal struggles that weighed him down, and you've got a recipe for a fall no one saw coming. Tony Franciosa's story isn't just about losing fame, it's about how fast it can slip away when the pieces don't line up. Do you think he deserved a better shot at being remembered? A guy with that much talent, maybe he did. If this tale of a forgotten star got you thinking, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment with your take. I'd love to hear it.